Ever get stuck like maybe on a personal project and you just keep adding more and more stuff thinking, well, I might need this later. And suddenly your code's a mess, right? Like you're lost in this maze you built yourself. Well, today we're diving into something that can totally save us from that whole thing. It's called YAGNI.
You aren't going to need it. Yeah, it's pretty much what it sounds.
Okay, now that is music to my ears. So like no more building a whole GPS system into my to-do list app just in case.
Exactly. With YAGNI, it's all about being focused. You build what you need right now to solve the problem in front of you. You don't get bogged down with features that might never even be used.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But how does that actually work, like in a real coding situation?
Okay, so let's say you're building a social media app, right? It's easy to get carried away and want to add every feature you can think of, video uploads, live streaming, all that. But with YAGNI, you would take a step back.
So instead of that whole big vision, what's the bare minimum you need for launch?
Exactly. You'd focus on the core stuff. So user registration, being able to create posts and share them, get those things working perfectly, and then launch with just those.
I can see how that would be way less overwhelming than trying to do everything at once. But wouldn't you risk missing out on things your users might actually want?
And that's the really clever part about AGI. When you launch with a simpler version, you get feedback from actual users so much faster. You see what they respond to, what they ask for, and then you decide what to build next. No more guessing, you're using real data.
Ah, so it's kind of like building with Legos. You start with a good base, then add or change things based on how it looks. Way
Well,
more adaptable.
precisely. And that adaptability is so important, especially because software development changes so fast. User needs change, trends change, and Wage and I helps you keep up with all of that.
Makes sense. And speaking of keeping up, this approach really seems to fit with that whole agile development idea, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Your AG&I is like a core part of agile and iterative frameworks. Short cycles, constant feedback, less wasted effort. It all goes together.
So if YAG is all about keeping things simple, I gotta ask, when is it not the best way to go? Are there times when you do need to think further ahead?
Great question. And yeah, you're right. YAG&I isn't a magic solution for everything. There are definitely some areas where you need to plan ahead, like take infrastructure, for example.
Okay, so with infrastructure, it's kind of like if you were building a house right, you wouldn't want to just throw up walls without a good foundation, would you? Even if you're not totally sure what the second floor is going to look like yet.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you might not know exactly how much server capacity you'll need down the line, but you want to make sure you're using something that can scale up if you need it to. You don't want to start over from scratch every time you grow. So it's more like you're designing for tomorrow, even though you're building for today, if that makes
Uh,
sense.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like laying the groundwork for growth, but without going crazy and building out every single server configuration right away.
Yeah.
So what about security? It seems like that would be another area where some early planning is important.
Oh, absolutely. While you don't need to build Fort Knox to protect your to-do list app, you do want to be thinking about protecting data and privacy right from the start. Trying to add that stuff in later is way harder and way more risky.
So it's not that YG&I doesn't matter for things like infrastructure and security. It's more that you got to recognize when some planning up front, even without knowing every little detail, will save you a huge headache down the road.
Yeah, that's it. Be smart with your planning. And that's where experience comes in, right? Knowing how to spot those make or break areas where a little effort early on can pay off big time.
And speaking of effort, let's talk about optimization. I can see YG&I being really important here. It's so easy to get caught up trying to make your code super efficient before you even know if it needs to be.
Oh yeah, for sure. Premature optimization, it's a classic developer trap. We all want to write the most beautiful, perfectly optimized code from day one, but honestly, it can really backfire.
It's like, why put a giant turbocharger on a car that's just going to be used for grocery runs?
Hmm.
Sure, you might impress a few other drivers, but is it really the best use of your time and money?
Exactly. And besides, when you optimize too early, you can actually create more technical debt. Your code gets more complicated than it needs to be, which can mean more bugs, harder debugging, and a code base that's harder to change in the future.
So instead of trying to optimize for every possible situation right away, YAG&I says to focus on what's needed now. If it's running well and it's doing what it needs to do, maybe that deep dive into hyper-optimization can wait.
Absolutely. Build a solid foundation first. Then, as your project grows and you have real data, you can start to see where the actual performance bottlenecks are and optimize strategically.
It's like you were saying earlier. We want to design for tomorrow, but we don't need to build every little bell and whistle for that future version right this second. We can adjust as we go.
That's it. YAGNI isn't about ignoring the future. It's about making smart choices about what you build now versus what can wait.
This has been super helpful in understanding IAG&I, but for anyone listening who's thinking, okay, I get it, but so what? Why should I care? What's the big payoff here?
Mm-hmm.
What's the benefit for someone hearing this and thinking, okay, IAG&I, pretty cool, but how's it actually going to help me write better code?
Think of it this way. With YAGNI, you're not just coding whatever, you're really putting thought into writing clean, focused code right. And that makes a huge difference in the long run.
Okay, intrigued. What kind of difference are we talking?
Well, for one thing, you can develop things so much faster. When your code base is leaner and easier to understand, you can add features and fix bugs way more efficiently. That means you can get stuff out to your users faster. Everybody wins.
Right. Less time fixing messy code, more time building cool stuff. What else?
Oh, way fewer bugs. When you're only building what's absolutely necessary, there are fewer places for bugs to hide. Plus, cleaner code is easier to test, saves you tons of headaches later.
Okay, so faster development, fewer bugs. This is starting to sound like less of a coding thing, more like a magic trick to make coding less stressful. What's the secret ingredient?
Adaptability. Remember we were talking about designing for the future? UAG&I makes your code base so much more adaptable to changes down the line. Since you haven't bogged it down with extra stuff, you have a flexible base to build on.
It's like, imagine trying to renovate a tiny house versus a huge mansion. One of those is going to be way easier to change up, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just what you code, but like how you think about coding.
Exactly. You got to be deliberate, always asking yourself, do I really need to build this right now, or am I just getting carried away?
Such a simple question, but so important. It's like that pause button before you overcomplicate things.
You got it.
Yeah.
And the more you think that way, the more natural it becomes.
So, to wrap up our Yay GNI deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this. Think about a project where maybe you went a little overboard with extra features. How could Yay GNI have changed your approach?
Hold on to that thought as you start your next coding adventure. It might just be the key to a smoother, more fun, and ultimately way more successful experience.